cash flowing out. What if the problem in New York isn't that people don't have money anymore, but that they've learned not to spend it here? That question alone already breaks the official narrative. Because New York was built on movement, of people, of ambition, of capital. Money was never supposed to sit still in this city. It was supposed to flow, to spill, to circulate endlessly through cafes, stores, restaurants, theaters, taxis, and streets that never slept. And yet, something fundamental has shifted. Walk through Manhattan today and you can feel it. Not in the headlines, but in the atmosphere. Storefronts still glow, menus are still printed on thick paper, prices are still aggressively high. But the behavior has changed. People look first. They hesitate. They calculate. They walk away. The city still looks expensive, but it no longer feels consumable. This is the first crack in the myth. New York was never just a city. It was a promise. Spend more, earn more, live more. That was the deal. But now the exchange feels broken. Every transaction carries friction. Every purchase feels like a mistake waiting to happen. The energy that once pushed people to say, "Why not?" has been replaced by a quiet internal alarm asking, "Is this worth it?" And this isn't about luxury spending or recession panic. This is about everyday money, coffee money, lunch money. Small decisions that once felt irrelevant now feel loaded. When a simple sandwich triggers second thoughts, something deeper is wrong. When people who live here actively avoid consuming in their own city, circulation collapses from the inside. What you're seeing isn't thrift, it's distrust. Distrust in prices, distrust in value, distrust in the idea that spending in New York gives anything back. The city keeps charging more but delivering less, and people notice. They adjust, they withdraw, they stop participating. This is how economic decline really starts. Not with empty skyscrapers or dramatic crashes, but with millions of micro-decisions made every day by people who no longer believe the city is on their side. Money doesn't disappear overnight. It reroutes, it hides, it waits. And in New York, it has started doing exactly that. The question everyone keeps asking is, why is spending down? But the more uncomfortable question is, where did the money actually go? Because it didn't vanish. It was redirected, extracted, absorbed by systems that don't reinvest in daily life. And once you see that mechanism clearly, the entire city starts to look different. Before we go any further, pause for a second and ask yourself something honestly. If money is still being earned, but no longer being spent in New York, then understanding why this shift happened isn't optional. It's essential. Because this isn't just about one city. It's about how modern urban systems quietly change behavior without ever announcing it. If this analysis is already challenging the image you had of New York, that's not accidental. The goal here isn't outrage, it's clarity. And clarity only works when you actively engage with what you're hearing. That's why I want you to do 3 simple things right now. First, leave a comment, not a generic one. Tell me this. Have you noticed yourself hesitating to spend money in big cities even when you can afford it? Or, if you've lived in New York, describe the moment you realized spending there no longer made sense. Writing this forces you to process what's happening, not just consume it passively. Second, if this perspective is already shifting how you see urban life, hit the like button, not as a favor to the channel, but as a signal. It tells the algorithm that deeper analysis like this matters more than surface-level city marketing and fake optimism. And third, subscribe. Because this video doesn't stand alone. What we're uncovering here connects directly to housing, tourism, infrastructure, mental health, and the silent collapse happening inside major cities long before headlines admit it. Now that we've established that spending has stopped, the next question becomes far more unsettling. It's not about fear or poverty. It's about behavior. About how people were slowly trained to stop consuming in a place that once lived off consumption itself. There was a time when spending money in New York didn't feel like a decision. It felt like a reflex. You walked, you saw something interesting, you stepped inside. A coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into drinks. Drinks turned into a late night you didn't plan. That spontaneous chain reaction wasn't accidental. It was the economic engine of the city. And today, that engine is quietly shutting down. What replaced spontaneity wasn't discipline or minimalism. It was calculation. Every choice now comes with mental friction. People pause before opening a menu. They scan prices before sitting down. They check their phones not out of distraction, but out of self-defense. In New York, spending has become a high-risk action, even for people who earn well. This shift didn't happen because residents suddenly became cheap. It happened because the city taught them to be cautious. When prices rise faster than value, when fees appear after the decision is already made, when basic experiences feel designed to trap rather than reward, the brain adapts. It stops trusting impulse. It suppresses curiosity. It chooses safety over pleasure. That change rewires urban behavior. The city still looks alive, but it moves differently. People walk with purpose, not wonder. They meet at apartments instead of bars. They eat before going out. They delay decisions that used to feel automatic. Each of these choices seems small, but together they drain the bloodstream of the local economy. Here's the quiet paradox. New York didn't lose money first. It lost confidence. Confidence that a dollar spent would return something meaningful. Confidence that the experience would match the cost. Once that confidence erodes, even high incomes don't translate into circulation. Money stays parked, not because people are broke, but because they're alert. And this affects more than consumption. It reshapes social life. Fewer spontaneous gatherings mean fewer accidental conversations. Fewer casual purchases mean fewer human interactions. The city becomes efficient but hollow, optimized but tense. A place where everyone is present but no one is relaxed. You can see it in body language. In the way people rush past storefronts without looking. In the way tourists hesitate, then decide to just walk around. In the way locals warn visitors where not to spend instead of where to go. That's not normal urban advice. That's a survival tip. At this stage, the question isn't why people stopped spending impulsively. The real question is what system replaced spontaneity with fear of regret. Because once a city conditions its population to treat every purchase as a potential loss, the damage goes far beyond retail sales. It changes how people experience the city itself. And that leads directly to the next layer of this collapse. Because if people didn't stop spending entirely, and they didn't suddenly lose income, then we have to confront something far more uncomfortable. The money didn't disappear. It was redirected. When people say money disappeared from New York, they're describing the feeling, not the reality. Money didn't vanish. It was rerouted. Quietly, systematically, and almost invisibly. What changed wasn't how much people earned, but where every dollar was pulled the moment it entered the city's ecosystem. In the past, spending flowed outward. A coffee paid a barista. Rent supported a landlord who lived nearby. A night out kept small businesses alive. The city recycled its own money through human interaction. Today, that loop is broken. A growing portion of every transaction is siphoned upward and outward before it ever touches real life. Fees are the most obvious layer, but they're not the core problem. Platform commissions, financial intermediaries, corporate property owners, and infrastructure systems now intercept money at scale. You don't just pay for a meal anymore. You pay the delivery app, the payment processor, the landlord's holding company, the building's management firm, and the city itself. By the time value reaches an actual worker, it's been thinned out. This is why prices rise while service declines. Money is no longer funding experience. It's servicing extraction. New York has become a city where consumption feels expensive but impersonal, because spending no longer strengthens the local fabric. It feeds structures that don't reinvest in daily life. Here's the unsettling shift. People sense this even if they can't articulate it. They feel that spending doesn't circulate back into the neighborhood, that it disappears into systems that feel distant, automated, and indifferent. And when people feel that their money isn't participating in a shared economy, they instinctively pull back. This is where trust collapses. Not trust in businesses, but trust in the city as a reciprocal system. A city works when people believe their participation matters. When that belief fades, behavior changes fast. Residents learn to spend outside the city when possible. Tourists budget defensively. Locals substitute experiences with avoidance. And the city responds the wrong way. Instead of restoring circulation, it increases pressure. Higher prices to compensate for lower volume. More fees to stabilize revenue. More monetization of basic movement. That response accelerates the problem it's trying to fix. This is why storefronts stay open but feel empty. Why foot traffic exists without engagement. Why money is present in theory but absent in practice. The city looks functional, yet economically numb. And once extraction replaces exchange, the relationship between people and place becomes transactional, not communal. That's the real reason spending stopped. Not because New York lost its wealth, but because it lost its credibility as a place where money still means participation. At some point, spending money in New York stopped feeling neutral and started feeling adversarial. Not indulgent, not even irresponsible. Adversarial. As if every purchase is a test you're expected to fail. Prices aren't just high, they feel aggressive. Interfaces are confusing by design. Fees appear after commitment. Policies are written to protect systems, not people. And the result is a city where consuming feels less like participation and more like self-inflicted harm. This is where the emotional break happens. People don't stop spending because they're broke. They stop because spending feels humiliating, being charged extra for breathing space, for sitting down, for staying 5 minutes longer than expected, for making the wrong choice in a menu that was never transparent to begin with. The city doesn't just take money, it makes you feel foolish for offering it. That psychological shift matters more than any price index. When consumers feel punished, they don't complain loudly at first. They internalize it. They adapt quietly. They start avoiding. They memorize which places feel hostile. They warn friends. They build routines that minimize exposure. Over time, an entire population learns how not to engage. This is why even people with high incomes now treat New York as a low-trust environment. You can afford it, but you don't want to participate. Because participation feels like consenting to a rigged interaction. And once that perception takes hold, no amount of branding can undo it. Here's the deeper damage. Punitive pricing doesn't just reduce spending. It rewires memory. People leave experiences feeling drained instead of fulfilled. They don't remember the meal. They remember the bill. They don't talk about the night. They talk about the surcharge. The story they carry forward isn't joy. It's resentment. That resentment compounds. It spreads through conversations, social media, casual warnings. Don't go there. It's not worth it. You'll regret it. Cities survive on narrative. And New York's narrative has quietly flipped from aspiration to cautionary tale. What makes this even more destructive is how normalized it has become. When punishment is constant, people stop reacting emotionally and start responding strategically. They stop exploring. They stop experimenting. They stop saying yes. The city becomes something to navigate, not enjoy. And this is the point where spending doesn't just slow down, it structurally collapses. Because a city that teaches its population to avoid engagement can't sustain itself through volume, culture, or trust. It can only extract harder from fewer people. And that path leads somewhere very specific. Because when a city keeps charging more while delivering less, it eventually reaches a breaking point. Moment where the question isn't why is it expensive, but what exactly am I paying for anymore? There was a time when New York's prices came with an unspoken guarantee. You paid more, but you received something intangible in return. Energy, density, opportunity, access. The sense that being here, even when it was hard, meant you were plugged into something bigger than yourself. Today, that exchange feels broken. The city still charges premium prices, but the return has quietly vanished. What people are reacting to isn't cost alone. It's the collapse of value. High prices only work when they are justified by experience. But in New York now, spending money rarely improves the quality of the moment. Restaurants feel rushed and understaffed. Apartments feel smaller, louder, more precarious. Transportation feels unreliable and tense. Even public space feels transactional, as if every square foot is waiting to be monetized. This is the point where people stop asking, "Can I afford this?" and start asking, "Why am I paying for this?" That question is devastating for a city built on symbolic value, because New York never sold comfort. It sold meaning, and when meaning disappears, price becomes impossible to defend. You see it in the way people downgrade their expectations. They stop comparing New York to its past glory and start comparing it to other places. Cities where rent is lower, stress is lower, and daily life doesn't feel like a negotiation. Suddenly the premium makes no sense. Why pay more to feel worse? This shift is especially visible among long-term residents. People who once defended the city aggressively now speak about it with exhaustion, not anger, fatigue, the kind that comes from realizing you are giving more every year and receiving less in return. That emotional calculus is what drives people to disengage long before they physically leave. And here's the paradox. As value collapses, the city doubles down on price. Not because it's greedy, but because it's cornered. When fewer people spend, the system compensates by extracting more from those who remain. That strategy creates a short-term illusion of stability while accelerating long-term decay. The city becomes dependent on friction, on penalties, on inconvenience fees disguised as normal life. And the more that happens, the more people withdraw. Not dramatically, quietly. They stop exploring. They stop recommending. They stop investing emotionally. At this stage, the decline is no longer economic. It's relational. The bond between the city and its inhabitants erodes. Trust dissolves. Loyalty evaporates. And when a city loses the belief of the people who live inside it, the damage runs deeper than empty storefronts. Because once residents stop believing New York delivers anything worth its cost, the next adaptation is inevitable. They don't just stop spending occasionally, they learn how to avoid spending altogether. At a certain point, people who live in New York don't just complain about prices, they change their behavior, quietly, methodically, almost instinctively. This is the phase where spending stops being emotional and becomes strategic. Residents don't boycott the city out of protest, they simply learn how to bypass it. You can see this adaptation everywhere. People eat before they go out. They carry coffee from home. They meet friends in apartments instead of bars. They walk longer distances to avoid transit fares. They order less, stay shorter, leave earlier. None of these choices feel dramatic on their own, but together, they form a parallel economy of avoidance. This isn't austerity. It's intelligence. Long-term residents understand the city's traps better than anyone. They know which neighborhoods inflate prices without adding value. They recognize menus designed to upsell rather than serve. They've learned that spontaneity costs more than it gives back, so they plan around the city instead of participating in it. What makes this dangerous is that residents were once New York's most reliable consumers. Tourists came and went, but locals sustained daily circulation. When residents pull back, the city loses its foundation. A cafe can survive fewer tourists. It cannot survive locals who stop showing up entirely. And this behavioral shift spreads socially. New residents are taught how to avoid spending before they're taught where to enjoy themselves. Advice sounds less like, "You have to try this place," and more like, "Don't. Waste your money there." That tone alone reshapes the city's emotional economy. There's also a psychological element that rarely gets discussed. Avoidance becomes a coping mechanism. Spending less inside the city gives residents a sense of control. It's one of the few ways they can push back against a system that constantly demands more. In that sense, withholding money feels like self-preservation. But this comes at a cost. When people stop spending locally, they also stop participating, socially. Fewer shared spaces, fewer casual interactions, fewer reasons to linger. The city becomes efficient, but emotionally thin. functional, but joyless. And this is the quiet irony. The city didn't push residents away physically first. It pushed them away economically and psychologically. People are still here, but they're no longer engaged. They move through New York like temporary visitors in their own lives. Once that happens, the next group feels it immediately. Because if even the people who live here don't want to spend money here, what message does that send to those just passing through? Tourism used to be New York's pressure release valve. Even when locals pulled back, visitors filled the gap. They spent freely because they believed they were buying an experience, not just a product. Today, that dynamic has inverted. Tourists still arrive, but they behave differently. They walk more than they enter. They film more than they buy. They observe instead of participate. You can see it in real time. Crowded sidewalks, packed landmarks, endless photos, and half-empty businesses just steps away. The city looks busy, but the registers tell a different story. Visitors are present, but cautious. They've already been conditioned before landing. Social media warnings, viral complaints, stories about hidden fees, shock prices, and regret. By the time they arrive, they're defensive. Instead of excitement, tourists bring strategies. They set strict budgets. They choose look but don't touch itineraries. They treat New York like an open-air museum rather than a living city. Times Square becomes something to pass through, not spend in. Soho becomes a backdrop, not a marketplace. Even restaurants are evaluated not for desire, but for risk. This is the collapse of emotional spending. Tourists don't feel welcomed into the city's economy. They feel hunted by it. Every interaction feels like a test. Every door feels like a potential trap. So they minimize exposure. They walk, they watch, they leave. And here's the critical detail most analyses miss. These tourists aren't poor. Many have traveled thousands of miles and paid premium airfare. They have money. What they don't have is trust. And without trust, spending dries up fast. This shift damages more than revenue. It breaks the city's feedback loop. Tourists once carried New York's mythology back home. They returned with stories of nights out, unexpected discoveries, spontaneous moments. Now they return with warnings. It's not worth it. Everything's a scam. Just walk around. Those stories travel faster than marketing budgets ever could. They reshape perception globally. New York stops being aspirational and starts being instructional. A place you study, not a place you indulge in. And the most dangerous part is how invisible this is from the surface. Officials count foot traffic and assume recovery. But foot traffic without spending is a hollow victory. It means people are consuming the image of the city while rejecting the reality of participating in it. When that happens, the burden shifts again. If tourists won't spend and residents won't spend, the pressure doesn't disappear. It concentrates, and it lands on the smallest, most fragile parts of the urban economy. Small businesses were never just shops in New York. They were social anchors. Cafes where routines formed. Stores where faces became familiar. Places that absorbed the city's pressure and translated it into something human. And yet, these are the first casualties of a system that no longer rewards participation, only scale. The collapse doesn't arrive as a headline. It arrives as exhaustion. Rent increases that feel arbitrary. Platform fees that eat margins silently. Delivery apps that promise exposure but extract profit. Payment processors that take a cut before the owner even counts the day's earnings. By the time a dollar reaches a small business, it has already been weakened. This is why so many places now feel temporary. Businesses open knowing they might not last. Menus shrink. Hours shorten. Staff turns over constantly. The goal isn't growth anymore. It's survival. And survival mode businesses cannot create atmosphere, loyalty, or community. They operate defensively, just like their customers. What makes this collapse particularly cruel is its invisibility. From the outside, it looks like churn. One cafe closes, another opens. One boutique disappears, another replaces it. But underneath, the model has changed. Ownership shifts from locals to investment-backed operators. Identity is replaced by replication. Neighborhoods lose texture and gain uniformity. For residents, this reinforces avoidance. Why spend money locally if local no longer feels local? Why support a business that feels as extractive as the systems behind it? The emotional contract between customer and shop dissolves. Spending becomes transactional again, stripped of meaning. For tourists, the effect is just as damaging. They come seeking character and find copies. They expect discovery and find optimization. The city begins to feel interchangeable with anywhere else that monetized authenticity until nothing authentic remained. And this feeds the larger loop. As small businesses disappear, neighborhoods lose reasons to linger. Foot traffic turns into flow-through. People pass by instead of stopping. Money keeps moving, but never settles. At the end of the day, this isn't a failure of entrepreneurship. It's a failure of environment. When a city no longer allows small businesses to function as human spaces, it erases the connective tissue that makes spending feel worthwhile. And that erasure creates a dangerous illusion. On paper, the city still looks alive. But in reality, it's hollowing out from the middle. And when the middle disappears, only denial keeps the structure standing. What keeps New York functioning right now isn't confidence. It's denial. A shared, unspoken agreement to act as if nothing fundamental has changed. Institutions repeat growth narratives. Media focuses on surface-level vibrancy. Real estate listings talk about resilience and demand. And people nod along, even as their behavior tells a very different story. This denial isn't accidental. It's structural. Admitting that New York has become financially inhospitable to normal life would collapse too many interests at once. Property values depend on belief. Tourism depends on image. Corporate investment depends on the idea that this city is still the center of gravity. So the story must be maintained, even when daily reality contradicts it. You can feel this tension everywhere. People complain privately but stay quiet publicly. They joke about prices instead of questioning them. They normalize stress instead of naming it. The absurd becomes routine. A $40 lunch is just New York. A $1,000 rent increase is market forces. Exhaustion is reframed as ambition. This psychological compression is dangerous. When systems fail slowly, denial becomes a survival strategy. Acknowledging the full scope of decline would force decisions people aren't ready to make. Leaving. Letting go of identity. Admitting that the dream they bought into no longer exists in its original form. So the city floats on inertia. People stay because they've already invested too much to question the return. Businesses stay because exiting feels like failure. Governments stay optimistic because pessimism would trigger panic. Everyone participates in keeping the illusion intact. But denial has a cost. It prevents correction. It delays adaptation. It ensures that problems deepen before they're addressed. And while officials point to metrics and headlines, the real indicators are behavioral. People spend less, engage less, commit less. That's not a temporary mood. It's a rational response. The most telling sign of denial is language. Words like vibrant, revitalizing, bounce back get repeated endlessly. Meanwhile, residents quietly restructure their lives to minimize exposure to the city's economy. Tourists lower expectations. Small businesses disappear without ceremony. A city can survive bad years. What it cannot survive is pretending nothing is wrong while its core behaviors erode. At some point, reality forces the conversation. And when that happens, the question won't be whether New York declined. What's happening in New York is often framed as a local anomaly, a temporary imbalance, a post-pandemic distortion. But that framing misses the larger signal. New York is not an exception. It is an early indicator. A compressed preview of what happens when a global city pushes extraction beyond participation and calls it progress. For decades, New York functioned as the ultimate proof of concept. If capitalism, density, ambition, and culture could coexist anywhere, it was here. The city absorbed pressure, monetized chaos, and still delivered meaning. That's why its current behavior matters so much. When the most resilient urban machine on the planet starts losing circulation, the model itself is in question. Other cities are watching closely, even if they don't admit it. London, Paris, Toronto, San Francisco. They share the same ingredients: financialization of housing, platform-driven economies, tourism optimized for volume instead of experience, rising costs justified by prestige rather than value. New York simply reached the breaking point first. And here's the most uncomfortable part. The collapse doesn't look like ruins. It looks like normalization. Sidewalks still crowded. Skylines still photographed. Infrastructure still operating, barely. But the emotional contract is gone. People no longer believe the city works for them. They believe it works on them. This is why the money didn't disappear. It learned. It adapted. It stopped participating in a system that no longer felt reciprocal. And once that behavior spreads, it's almost impossible to reverse with marketing or incentives alone. You can't force trust. You can't mandate belief. New York's message to the world is subtle but brutal. A city can be famous, powerful, and wealthy on paper and still fail at the most basic function of urban life, making people feel that participation is worth the cost. When that feeling disappears, decline doesn't need headlines. It becomes embedded in daily behavior. The real danger isn't empty streets. It's cities full of people who are mentally checked out, present but disengaged, living inside systems they no longer invest in emotionally or financially. That's not collapse as spectacle. That's collapse as routine. And if New York, with all its symbolic weight, can reach this state, then no city is immune. The question isn't whether this model will spread. It already is. The question is whether anyone is willing to acknowledge it before adaptation becomes the only option left. If you made it to the end of this video, it means something here resonated with you. Not as entertainment, but as recognition. Because this isn't just about New York. It's about how modern cities quietly reshape behavior until people stop participating without ever making a formal decision to leave. If you've experienced this shift yourself, I want you to leave a comment with this exact phrase. The money didn't disappear. It learned. That single sentence captures everything this video is trying to expose. If this analysis helped you see urban life differently, hit the like button. Not out of habit, but to push this kind of long-form, critical thinking into a space usually dominated by surface-level narratives and false optimism. Subscribe to the channel if you want more deep dives into urban collapse, social behavior, and the invisible systems shaping how cities really function beneath the marketing and mythology. And before you go, watch the next video appearing on your screen. It connects directly to what you just heard and takes this analysis one step further, showing what happens when people don't just stop spending, but stop believing in the city altogether. You're not alone in noticing this. Stay curious, stay critical,